Hi folks, Denise Howell here. Next up on This Week in Law, we've got two patent experts, Matt Macarti and Steve Nipper. They're going to help us understand the Google Motorola mobility acquisition and all of the patents that went along with that. We're going to check in on the latest with Lodsys and the Google Oracle litigation. And we've got a real interesting way to resolve litigation that you don't want to be involved in. Get your Quake 3 remotes ready. We're coming up next on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 125, recorded August 19, 2011. Rising Righteous Indignation. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to create a high-quality website or blog. For a free trial and 10% off your new account for 6 months, go to Squarespace.com and use offer code TWiL8. And by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly, all streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hello and yeehaw, it's Denise Howell, and I'm back from my trip to Wyoming last week. So glad to be here with you guys on This Week in Law. We've got a great panel. This week it's all about the patents, and we've got two fabulous patent lawyers with us here today to help us unpack what's going on out there in this crazy world of patent acquisition and litigation. First, we've got Matt Macarti in studio. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Denise. How's it going?
It's going great. Great to see you there in the lovely Petaluma Brick House.
That's great.
And wonderful to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Also joining us is Steve Nipper. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Denise. How are you?
Great to have you back on the show. I'm doing well. And so happy that I was actually trying to get you and your law partner, Matt Buchanan, on the same show at one point. Matt joined us last week, so it's great to get the second half of your dynamic duo here with us today.
Thanks.
Also with us today is Evan Brown in Chicago. Hello, Evan.
Hey, Denise. How's it going? Welcome back. Hope your trip to Wyoming was as awesome as it sounded. You know, that's great.
It was. Little connectivity, lots of horse. So
that sounds like the Wyoming I know.
Yes, it was wonderful. But then I came back to this incredible news that Google just sort of dropped out of the sky, that it was buying Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion, which everyone has been unpacking all week. And I figure, we've got to just jump on that bandwagon, because what they also purchased were upwards of 24,000 patents valued at over $500,000 apiece. And I want to get your guys' take on this and what it means for Google, and in particular with a lot of the Android litigation that's out there, if you think this will play in. Matt, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I've seen different numbers. I'm not really sure what it's at. It's 17,000 plus a lot of pending applications. But it's certainly the crux of the purchase was the patent acquisition. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure it's going to have a big effect, at least immediately, on the Android litigation or the litigation for the OEM manufacturers that are being sued by various companies like Apple and Microsoft, because the patents that they were actually acquiring, at least some of those patents were already in play with litigation that Motorola either initiated or counterclaimed with. They asserted some of those patents against Apple and Microsoft already. I think, and Neil, I talked about this on TNT this week, I think one of the biggest potential ramifications of this is the patent portfolio and certain patents that we don't know about that might actually come into play with the Oracle case, which is actually Google's biggest kind of headache right now. Mm-hmm. So to the extent those can be worked into that case and maybe bring some leverage to the table for Google, that would be a potential sign that they could maybe cross-license or figure something out. But there's nothing really right now that indicates that's the case. I mean, we don't really know what the portfolio actually entails in detail. So To the extent there are some useful patents in there, they may be able to use them against Oracle to some extent to try to force settlement.
Steve, can you speak to this notion of building up a huge arsenal of patents to be able to throw at one another in litigation? This obviously is something that's gone on for quite some time, but it seems to really be ramping up in the mobile arena. And I'm wondering what your take on that is.
Well, a lot of times it ends up being a nuclear arms race of its own. That by having this stockpile of patents, if you get sued by, if Microsoft sues you, hopefully you can find one of the patents in your portfolio of tens of thousands of patents that Microsoft infringes that you can countersue them on. And through doing that, they hope that they can either put future lawsuits at bay or at least scare people off. Typically, that's with these patents. It's not necessarily something they're going to enforce against somebody, but really just more of a defensive position.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it seems to me from an economic and innovation standpoint, this is an odd place we've gotten to. And that, we talk about patent reform on this show and try and understand where things are going there. It seems like none of the patent reform proposals really address this particular problem, except to the extent that they try to address the ease with which patents can be granted. And so that's how you wind up with these huge portfolios of patents out there in the first place, I suppose. But as far as stockpiling and then, banking them for later use in a defensive way, the way you describe, is that something that you think is, good for U.S. business and commerce?
Well, I think typically when they're doing that, they're not enforcing it against, and correct me if I'm wrong, small businesses or enforcing it against individuals. They're really enforcing them against one another and using them as defenses against one another. And so I don't know that it has a huge impact where you're going to have people screaming to their congressman about it. One of the other reasons they would pick that portfolio up is to keep somebody else from picking it up. And obviously if somebody else picks up that portfolio, they could make their, they really could cause a lot of grief over it, and so sometimes that's a reason for picking them up as well.
Yeah, in this particular case, it was I think there was some at least discussion or rumor that Microsoft was interested in buying Motorola as well, and I'm sure Google would want to keep those patents out of Microsoft's hands. The mutual assured destruction strategy or doctrine seems to be more applicable when you have these companies kind of contemplating these suits. Here you have a situation where, the OEMs at least, not Google directly, all the OEM manufacturers of these phones, HTC and Samsung and Motorola, they're all tied into these cases already. So it really, you almost have to think that Google's looking at it as more of a either a defensive mechanism for them in particular, for Google, or to figure out a way to try to get some of these patents in the suit, which is, it's tough. It's tough if you're not, because Motorola's in cases right now and they're involved against Apple, but how that's going to play out with Google's patents and how they're going to be able to maybe get into that fight a little bit, I'm not really sure. It's a little speculative right now, and I think it's going to take a little time to work its way out.
So I have to ask this question. It's a bit esoteric, but I'm wondering what the protocol is, and I figure with you two patent pros on the show, you might know. I have certainly gone into companies before where they have been involved in a lot of R&D and have patented much of their own technology, and they're very proud of this, and they have huge walls. I'm thinking, for example, of Qualcomm in San Diego has an enormous wall where they display all their patents. What is the protocol when you have scooped up 25,000 patents and change in a big acquisition like this? Do you just kind of, put them in a warehouse somewhere? They're not really patents that you're responsible for. You bought them. What do you think, Matt?
I think that there is, those walls of plaques are usually kind of for the gratification of the inventors. And these big companies where they really just try to, they get plaques, and some of them have, walls full of them. But I think it comes down to they do their due diligence when they purchase the portfolio. They've done an extensive patent review, and they know exactly what it is they've got out of, they may not, let me rephrase it, they don't know all of the patents that they have potentially, but they know the good ones, and they know the important ones with broad claim scope. And those are sitting, and they have outlined potential uses for them. And I think that would be the interesting thing to find out, is start to learn out of all those patents what they find to be important.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure it will shake out. Steve, any more thoughts on this Google Motorola acquisition before we move on to some other related topics?
You know, not really. At least they get the staff that was working on it as well, so they don't have to try to deal with those 20-some thousand files that are coming in the door and trying to figure all that out. So I can only imagine the nightmare in dealing with that volume of projects.
Right. I mean, the scope of this is pretty amazing when you think that Google paid $1.65 billion for YouTube years ago, and this is 11 to 12 times that. Evan, were you surprised by this, and what's your take?
Like you, I thought it just came out of the sky. You know, I woke up and saw the story in my feed, and it actually just went right over to, another little Google acquisition. But then, well, that was Motorola Mobility. So I was, for one thing, I was excited to see a Chicago area company involved. Motorola historically has been based out of Schaumburg, a suburb of Chicago here. But as far as I have a couple of observations about it. One, there's just so many facets to all of it here, and the patents. After you stop and think about it, the patent issue seems to be the primary issue, or maybe the thing that was motivating Google the most to make the acquisition. And I thought it was really interesting. If you do the arithmetic, the value of these patents are the same for what Microsoft bought the Nortel patents back, was that earlier this year or sometime in 2010? So that
actually, I think it was Novell. I was rereading that article.
Oh wait, what did I say? Did I say Nortel? Oh yeah, I meant Novell. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So the way that arithmetic matched up all the way to the penny. Something like $500,000 some dollars and 8 cents. The arithmetic was exactly right. It really goes to show that there was something certainly in the valuation portion that where the patents were playing a big role here. But it's also interesting to see the effect that this will have on the box top sets, the TV, and all of the hardware side of things. But as far as a kind of a critique on all of this, or maybe a lamentation, really, when it comes to it, I want to pick up on something that Steve said, and it's like a nuclear arms race when all of this, and we were talking about these ideas of mutually assured destruction, and it's not hard to get to a point when you approach thinking about this intellectually that it's really kind of a sad state of affairs, isn't it? And do patents really equate, or can those really be equated in a meaningful sense with innovation? It seems to me a little bit sad that all of this money and all of these resources, to the tune of $12.5 billion transaction here, goes to purchase these things merely for the sake of an arms race that is all predicated on the assumption that the patent system does indeed foster innovation. And that's an open question at best. Who loses out on this is the consumers. This $12.5 billion acquisition is not chump change. It's not chicken scratch or whatever the word is here. So, to the extent that we have any doubts that the value of these patents really does translate into reality somewhere, and is not just something irrational that must be done to stay ahead of the counterpart of the Soviet Union in this nuclear arms race, that seems to be something pretty unfortunate and does not benefit the consumer. And it's not too hard to say then that does not promote the progress. It certainly doesn't promote economic progress, and I see that as a bit lamentable if certain assumptions that I've made are true, and you can kind of string all that together.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think that we've gotten to a place economically, and the fact that there's this whole mentality that companies are going to sue each other over these things for billions of dollars, where something needs to be reined in. I'm not sure if it's the entire litigation system or the patent system, but I agree. I'd love to see these resources going elsewhere than simply who owes whom money for what license that was or was not obtained.
Can I say something real quick on that?
Yeah.
Because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because there's a lot of cries for patent reform, software patent reform in particular. And I think a lot of it comes down to the real issue with some of this is more about the legal system and on the enforcement side than it really is about patenting. I mean, a lot of these things are very innovative, and whether they are or they aren't, that's how they're being dealt with at the patent office and how they're being obtained are two different things, and how they're being used. So I think it's important. Yeah, that there probably are some issues, and right now the Patent Reform Act, it doesn't really deal with that at all. It's dealing with the aspects of how patents are dealt with and how priorities obtained for them and post grant review, but it's not really dealing with the enforcement aspect of it within the legal system after the patents are already issued. So. So that it'll be interesting to see if some of the reform that develops over time focuses more on that, which would also give you the potential to focus on patent trolls, and then also this armament that people or companies are building up that really is just about quantity and mass more than it is about actual quality patents.
Right. Well, all of this reminds me a bit of, from time to time, particularly in election years, we begin to hear about tort reform.
Yes.
And it becomes a hot button political issue that, our country is too lawsuit happy, and that no one can succeed as a business or an entrepreneur because of the associated liability issues. And as soon as you open your doors as a business, you have a target on your back for somebody to come sue you for something. I've just never really had the sense of that analysis and argument being applied in the IP realm as dramatically as it seems to apply nowadays. Evan, any thoughts there?
Well, yeah, I mean, that seems to be the whole basis of the moral questionableness of non-practicing entities, with patent trolling, because, perfectly legitimate enterprises. I mean, with so many lawsuits being filed by patent trolls, it cannot, with any reasonableness, say that every single one of those lawsuits is well-founded. Is Lodsys being responsible with what it's doing with these small innovators? And yeah, I know they brought in Atari and the Angry Birds people and all that stuff. But going after these little guys, I mean, is that really, what's going to again, drive innovation, stir investment, stimulate the growth of our economy? You can get all high and mighty and political about it. So, there's a real palpable fear that innovators should have and startups should have about doing something that's incredibly innovative, and having the greediness of patent trolls motivate the patent troll in such a way that it seeks to extract some value in that litigation that is not derived from the value of the technology that is reflected in the patent that the patent troll holds. So I see the same thing that you're seeing, Denise.
One thing that you have to remember too is that they're buying these 20-some thousand patents, but that's not, they didn't buy the patent portfolio, they bought the business. And just looking at what Wikipedia is reporting, their revenue last year was $11.46 billion. So it isn't, they bought more than just those patents in this deal. And while we want to focus on the value of those patents, the reason for that, there's other reasons they would have picked up that Motorola mobility.
Sure, absolutely. It fits very nicely with two of Google's recent forays into something beyond search. So I think it makes good sense for them. At the same time, they've certainly acquired other companies that also made sense for them and not really, leveraged that yet. So that remains to be seen. But what I'd like to talk about now, since we touched on the issue of whether or not these might come to play in the Oracle suit and how that's an immediate concern for Google, that begins to be a quite immediate concern because they've got some big motions coming up back and forth between the parties in September and a trial date coming up on October 31st. Jan Brun Anderson on Google Plus asked me, and I'm going to toss this first to Steve and then to Matt, I guess it's too much to ask for a simple explanation of exactly what it is that Google and Oracle are fighting about regarding Android and Java. Steve, do you think you can provide that for us?
Well, I don't know if I can provide that. As from what I understand, Java is pretty integral into the software development kit that's used for developing apps for Android, and so there's a lot of Java that went into Android. And when Oracle purchased Sun a few years ago, one of the reasons they purchased it was to get the rights to Java, and so that ends up being the reason why the suit is going on, that Java is so heavily embedded within Android that it's an issue.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, the whole case is just fascinating if you're an inside baseball litigation kind of fan, if you're someone who likes courtroom drama. There's a lot of it going on in this case. There was an announcement earlier this month that Google was going to rely on some of Schmidt's testimony from when he was CTO at Sun long ago in the 70s that was helpful in their case. So, the back and forth about who's getting deposed and just the procedural jockeying in this case has a lot of drama as well. Matt, do you have any thoughts on those procedures or on the case in general as it goes toward trial?
Yeah, well, the specifics of what's copied, it's a copyright case and a patent infringement case. Mm-hmm. And the details of what's actually happening on the Java copying and what happened isn't nearly as interesting as the backstory that Oracle's been throwing out there with regard to Google's copying of this Java code. And emails going back and forth internally at Google saying we have to have this. Let's figure it out, and then eventually just saying we're going to do it, throwing caution to the wind apparently, and doing that. And then you have, so that's really a problematic scenario for Google when they're defending this, to show this willful infringement. And they have, even the judge in that case is basically saying, this is really a big problem for you, Google. I think the judge's quote was, all you need is this document in the Magna Carta to show infringement. So it's one of those cases where we just need the basic understanding of law and this document, and we can show that you copy. So they're in the corner right now, and what they're fighting parallel front with reexamination of Google's or Oracle's patents, Sun's old patent, and they're also trying to get these documents thrown out every chance they can. It's not working right now, so it's a big deal. But as far as the details of what it actually encompasses, it's that seems to you hardly ever see anything about that. It's always about the in courtroom jockeying that's going on. It's very back and forth.
Yeah, Evan, have you been following any of the we're deposing your CEO? No, we're deposing yours, and here's the smoking gun that we found this week. And this is the drama of this Oracle suit. Anything that's been entertaining to you as a litigator?
I mean, that is something that's always interesting in these big cases, and we've talked about that some, I think, on the show before, of these fights of trying to bring in the top person on these things. And that's the opportunity for the CEO to talk about how busy he or she is, and how they can't possibly stoop to the level of taking the time to be deposed for more than a couple hours in this multi-billion-dollar patent case. But yeah, there was some drama, wasn't there, about getting one of the Larry or Sergey, I think it was Larry Page, to be deposed in this Oracle matter here. And so I don't know what actually did happen with that, if that deposition actually did happen. I know it was supposed to, wasn't it? I didn't follow it through, with a lot of detail.
I think that they did get the order from the court that his testimony was relevant and necessary. So I'm sure that then it became, how much time and what the parameters were.
Yeah,
that's my recollection anyway. Steve, since we've just seen Google enter into this huge deal that was somewhat defensive and maybe somewhat preventive on the Motorola side, why do you think there was such a different strategy as far as making sure all the licensing ducks were in a row with Java? Why not just throw money at it on the front end instead of litigating on the back end?
Well, and if they had a time machine, they might choose to do things differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer to it is.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's something inherent in Linux and an open source operating system that leaves people open to these kinds of attacks, since you can never potentially do all the due diligence that you need to make sure that every piece of code is, sufficiently authorized?
Yeah, and I don't know if that is what's going on there, or if it's just that anytime Google, who has deep pockets, starts doing something new, suddenly all these lawsuits come out of the woodwork, and everyone's looking for ways to sue them. It's kind of hard to know.
So, Matt, you write the Litigating Apple blog, which has some of the Apple, HTC, Apple goings back and forth that is also all about Android. Over at Foss Patents, we've got a list of all the lawsuits related to Android, 38 of them as of March 11th, which, I don't know if people are surprised by that number, think it's really big, which I do, or, are surprised there aren't more of them. But what's going on here? Why is Android such a litigation magnet?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different. Some of those. I don't know if they have the kind of Lodsys, version of those cases in that chart. But he also has on that same site. He has various what he calls battle maps. It's a graphical depiction of all of this, and it hurts your brain to look at it. It's incredibly complex, and everything's crossing over to other litigation. But what it comes down to, and I think Google versus Oracle might be an example of kind of where I think Google was going after, how they were approaching this from the beginning with releasing Android. It was more of they saw the problem. Unlike when you look at a small software developer, app developer for the iPhone or for an Android phone, they're just creating, and oftentimes they're creating having no idea what's out there, and they don't have the resource to figure out what's out there before they release their product. These sorts of problems with Java were front and center with Android and with Google from the very beginning, and I think some of their approach was let's just do it. We got to do it. We need it, and and this is what happens when you treat things like that. And I think I agree. And if they had a crystal ball, I think if they realized just how much they might get put under the microscope and how much trouble they might be facing in this Oracle suit, which I think is their biggest hurdle and their biggest potential threat out of all of these things, just money-wise and potential injunctions and things like that, that I think they would have treated it much differently. But it's I'm surprised. I guess it didn't shock me to know there's 38. It might shock you if you think about it in terms of time. So many of these have just kind of sprouted up in the last 2 years. I mean, if you go back 3 or 4 years ago, you're not going to see this. You're not going to really see Android in the state it's in now either. But it's just become because these OEM manufacturers, for instance, are a big part of that equation, and they're being sued by everybody from Microsoft to Apple, and they're just kind of out there exposed, and protect themselves with whatever patents they already have, but nothing that's really directed to the Android system. It's just these other hardware patents they can throw at Apple or throw at Microsoft. So you're really talking about kind of a defenseless operating system when it comes to patenting rights. And I think a lot of that was just, when you go out there like that, these are the ramifications of it, and it's really expanded over the last 6 months to 12 months.
All right, well, we've touched on Lodsys. I want to get more into that and what's going on there, and also the latest in software patents and much more with Matt Macarti and Steve Nipper and Evan Brown in just a moment here. But first, I want to thank our first sponsor for episode 125 of This Week in Law, and that is Squarespace. Squarespace.com, of course, is the fast and easy way to create a high-quality website or blog. I use it for my personal site, Bag and Baggage. It's actually my personal and professional site. It's my home on the web, which, of course, everybody needs these days. You certainly need to have a location where You have control over your data that's going up there. The information that you're putting out can't be shut down, can't be taken away from you. And Squarespace makes it super easy and convenient. Its UI for creating and managing a site or blog is a joy to use. It's optimized for both beginners and CSS experts. And its design templates are not like a template at all. They are really pretty and complex, and really whatever kind of look and feel that you want for your site. Squarespace has a great place for you to start, and then you can customize to your heart's content. Its iPhone and iPad apps make it easy to update your site on the go. Its online resources and special support team give you personal help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's an all-inclusive service. So once you pay your monthly fee, you get a blog module where you can import from any other place that you've had as your home on the web. It supports WordPress, Blogger, Movable Type, and TypePad. And once you've imported, you can, of course, export as well. So you're never locked into Squarespace, which is a really nice feature. There is a form builder to collect email addresses and other information from your site's visitors. There's a Flickr photo display where you can choose a thumbnail or slideshow view, and a Twitter widget, which can display all your tweets on your site in a customizable and great-looking format. There are social media buttons that support just about all of the services that are out there. And if you're ever in need of doing something that's not built right into Squarespace, its help database is wonderful, and you can almost always find your answers there for what particular custom thing you need to do at that moment that they haven't already anticipated, though they've anticipated so much. There are Google Maps and more. Its tracking and statistics let you know how many times your site is viewed, where the traffic's coming from. It helps you with SEO. There's permission access handling. And of course, the cloud architecture for speed and site stability is just, it lets you sleep at night. You know your site's going to be up no matter what happens, no matter what media outlet is pointing towards you. So you need to check it out for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Go sign up for a free account. You don't need a credit card. Just try it out. You can start building your own site. Then if you decide to purchase, use the offer code TWiL8 and you'll get 10% off for 6 months. That's squarespace.com and use the offer code TWiL8. Thanks so much, Squarespace, for supporting This Week in Law. All right, guys, so we've talked a bit about Lodsys today. That's been out there percolating for a while. Let's check in and see what's happening. I guess the most recent thing that's happening has nothing. Well, first, let's set the stage, okay? Lodsys is a company that claims it has a patent on the in-app purchase process used in iOS apps. And they're going after individual developers, claiming that while Apple may have a license to this process, the individual app developers do not. So that is who Lodsys is pursuing. There is a lawsuit pending. I think there are several lawsuits pending against developers. I'm not sure if they are together in one or not. I think that they're separate, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And lately, though, Google has stepped in, not to the lawsuit itself, but to the patent, and has challenged the patent itself and its validity. Matt, do you think that that's something that might come out of left field and help these developers?
Well, I think it's definitely another way to attack a patent. The problem with it is it doesn't bring the app developers much immediate help. We know that patents they're going through re-exam. As far as I know, it's going to be an inter-parties re-exam, which means that Google will be heavily involved in everything that goes back and forth on Office actions. The problem with that is it's very long and time-consuming, 3 years or so, before it even gets to maybe a final determination, and then there are always appeals after that. So I think it's a valid opportunity. It's interesting that they're able to do it, considering they apparently have a license, and almost every license I've ever seen or drafted for licensing excludes the right to challenge a patent, because you don't want to have your licensees challenging the validity of the very licenses that they have the rights to. So here they've done that. They found a way. Either they just said, forget it, we're going to do it anyway, or they somehow don't have that provision in their license agreement. But it's an avenue. I think it may eventually work. I just think that the litigation, the intervention that you see, or the attempt to intervene by Apple, is likely to be a more effective method to try to show that the app developers are entitled to the same license that Google and Apple have.
Right. So procedurally, where this stands is suits against the developers are pending, and Apple has sought to come in as a party and say, hey, no, we're the party that you should be coming after, or we have an interest in this suit and we need to be involved, even though we haven't been named as a party. Steve, the Lodsys folks have opposed this. Do you have any take on what we'll see happen?
Well, I think that was an interesting, it was a great argument on Apple's part that they have a license and that their app developers, participate under that license. What Lodsys was arguing is that was filed, that the motion by Apple trying to intervene was done before they had added in a bunch of unrelated defendants. They'd added in, I think, Atari and some others. Obviously, they don't have this quote-unquote license from Apple. And so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Obviously, in that case, they may try to split the case apart. That might be one way of kind of taking those app developers' case to the side, even though Lodsys has come in and added in those additional defendants. The other thing that they might look at doing, that the app developers might look at doing is trying to get the courts to stay the litigation until that re-examination runs its course. I don't know how often that happens, but with a process that can take 3 years, courts don't tend to like to leave cases on their docket that long that aren't going anywhere. So that'll be interesting to see if they're able to make some progress towards staying the litigation.
Yeah, that's a very important issue, because I think Google would like that, to get a stay in place, or try to have the app developers try to get a stay in place while the re-exam goes through the patent office. The problem with that is that courts, whereas 5 to 10 years ago it would have been almost an automatic stay, now I think it's under 50% that the courts will actually stay a case pending re-exam, and since they're in the Eastern District of Texas, I think it's even less likely. It's probably somewhere around the 30 to 40% chance of them staying the case. So Google's attempt here, I think, is admirable, but I'm not sure it's really going to have much of an end effect on the litigation.
I think I know the answer, but why don't we just explain for anybody who might be perplexed? Why has Google done this, Matt? What's their horse in this race?
Well, I think they're doing it because they see this as an opportunity to protect the app developers. It's also an opportunity to do something on the side. If you have Apple intervening, and potentially the only thing Apple's doing is going in there to try to prove that this theory of exhaustion, that their license extends to the app developers. So they don't really need to get involved in the litigation to do that. Google hasn't shown any willingness to just assume the defenses, pick out app developers and represent them, or try to defend them in this case. So this is the other opportunity, I suppose. It's to once the patent's invalidated through re-exam, it eliminates all the problems, right? So it's just a matter of time, and it's a long process. And I think in the end, Lodsys is going to get what it deserves, and that's going to be not much of anything. So I think they're probably if you looked at these patents, there's some incredibly I should be careful how I say it, but there are some less than stellar claims that are in these patents. So I wouldn't be surprised if this thing fails on more than one front for Lodsys.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just app developers that they've gone after.
Yeah.
I want to say I've heard that they any business that had a chat room set up as part of the purchasing aspect of their website. I think they've gone after some businesses that run websites like that. So these patents have been interpreted by them broadly as they've sought these licenses.
Mm-hmm. And they've just simply been successful in getting people to back down and pay up?
Well, I think a lot of times when you look at the license fee, and it was like 0.5% or something is what they were seeking from the app developers. Obviously, they're probably seeking different amounts from different businesses. But you look at the amount, it's a business decision. You look at this, the amount they want of blood money to take the license versus the tens, if not hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million it's going to cost you to duke it out with them in a patent infringement trial. And from a business infringement standpoint, sometimes it's easier. From a business standpoint, it's sometimes just easier just to pay the fee and move on. And that's just a tough decision.
Right. It's a little bit extortionate sounding, and it's reminding me of the RIA suits against consumers. That maybe you have a good response to our suit against you, but it's going to cost you more than $2,500 to get rid of it. So just pay us that and we'll go away now.
Well, I don't think Lodsys really has a very cohesive strategy. I mean, they've gone after everybody and everyone, and they haven't. A good patent troll, and I use that loosely. The typical business model is not to go to court. It's usually to make the license fee appealing enough that you stay out of court and you accumulate a lot of those licenses and the royalties from that. So here they've just spread themselves way too thin. They brought in some really big players, so they're definitely unconventional in their tactic.
But they started it how they usually start that is they go around and they get some big name licensees and they can say, oh, well, Apple licensed this patent from us, Google licensed this patent from us, so guess what? You probably should do the same thing. And it's pretty common for them to do that.
Evan, what do you think about Lodsys and where this is going?
Well, I just think it's like going back to what we were talking about earlier, comparing it to tort reform. I don't like it. I don't like what Lodsys is doing. I think it's misusing patent law in the broadest sense, and it's something that's really just. It's a shame that it's happening. It's just like the person who has a minor fender bender and then goes into his plaintiff's personal injury lawyer the next day with the big neck brace on, looking for the legal system to make money that's not really founded on any underlying injustice that needs to be remedied. And I don't like it, and it's a scourge on the overall profession and the system that we work in.
Okay, I'm going to throw one out here that is another incredibly broadly worded patent aimed at a service that has some deep pockets. This is the Packet Video patent infringement case against Spotify. Packet Video has a patent that covers a device for the distribution of music information in digital form. And just a few weeks after the U.S. launch of Spotify, Packet Video launched its infringement case. Matt, do you think that this is going anywhere, or is this just another example of, hey, we've got a really broad patent and you better pay attention to it because we're not going to go away until you throw some money at us?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what's the name of the company? Packet
Video. Yeah,
they now my understanding is they have these their software on all these other devices out there for other services. So my guess here is that Spotify, they were just kind of sitting out there and doing their thing in the UK and maybe elsewhere in the world, and then they came into the US, and it's a matter of requiring a license. I don't think this is a patent that I think this is a frequently licensed deal that Spotify just hasn't got on board with yet. So I think perhaps it was inevitable. I'm not sure what the background was on how they addressed Spotify before they came to the U.S., but my understanding is that this was all known, that this was a potential problem as soon as they launched.
Right. Steve, is this just another example of what you were describing a minute ago? There are some high-profile licensees out there and Spotify just hasn't come on board with them yet?
Yeah, and I don't know with respect to this case if that's what's going on or not. I haven't heard one way or the other. Kind of a rude awakening when you come into the U.S. market to immediately have to deal with this, but particularly if they didn't see it coming, if they didn't know that there was a license that someone was trying to push everyone to obtain, or whether they just looked at, whether there's not these licenses in place and they just looked at Spotify as the easy first stone, to take across that river before they go after everyone else. It's hard to say.
Yep. Who knows? Maybe the text I read is pretty broad, so it would be interesting to have some more insights into the packet video strategy and know if they plan on putting other music services in their sites. Evan, have you looked at this, and any thoughts?
Yeah, I looked at it, and that is pretty dense. You know, that patent in there, and it's just what I get the sense of is that these folks might have been waiting around, waiting for Spotify to enter the U.S. market. Again, it sounds like these people are this packet video is a non-practicing entity, or at least it didn't develop the technology, right? Or did I just dream that?
They bought it from. I think they are practicing, but I think they bought it from somebody else.
Yeah,
Okay.
I read that they bought it.
Okay, so you know, the timing is obviously interesting here, intriguing, if not suspect. You know, Spotify just entering the U.S. market. It's as if there was some plan being hatched all along, so that the complaint would be ready to go once Spotify entered the market. That's the point I see on all this.
Yeah, the patent goes all the way back to 1995, and if anyone wants to read it in full, Rachel King has it over at ZDNet in a post there. Spotify already slapped with patent infringement lawsuit. So it definitely looks like it could cover just about any music sharing service, especially all the ones that are happening in the cloud these days. Matt, one thing that's been happening in the courts is further analysis of the validity of software patents. Looks like from your analysis, you don't think that this is any real threat to the concept of software patents in general. You want to bring us up to speed there?
Yeah, there's a recent case at the Federal Circuit, which is the appellate court that hears all of the appeals for patent cases. And the case was CyberSource, and it just came out in the last few days, I suppose, this week. And basically, I think it seems a lot worse than it is for people that are for patents, and it seems a lot better than it is for people that are against patent or software patents. And the real issue is that in that case, the facts were pretty poor for the patent holder. The claims in that patent, which is the portion of the patent that actually is interpreted for enforcement, were really broad mental steps kind of language, and it's always been the case that that's not patentable. And over time, people try to morph that into a hardware device or something tangible so that you can obtain coverage for it. And there are a lot of ways to do that, valid ways. This one wasn't one of them. This case was basically, we claim a computer, readable medium, so whatever that is, just any device, and then they just go into a litany of steps that are basically, mental steps or user steps that really have nothing to do with an actual device or implementation of software with hardware. That's where you get in trouble in software patents, is when you try to go out there and just capture this business method type of thing that doesn't have any tangible relationship to hardware. And in this case, the court said, yeah, we uphold the invalidity of it. The lower court was correct. It's invalid. It's a pure mental step. But it doesn't take away software patents. A decent patent attorney can draft these claims so that they actually are patentable in view of something besides a pure mental step.
Right. So this was no new limitation. This was something that was always a limitation on software patents, and we just see the court applying it here.
That's my take on it. I mean, Stephen might have a different take. I'm not sure.
What do you think, Steve?
Well, and with this particular style of claiming, it's easy to change how we draft patent applications from here forward to stay away from that type of claiming and that type of issue that's going on, like Matt was saying. But the other issue is there's a number of patents out there that include that type of claiming, and that type of claiming that before was viewed as a way to get around some of those limitations they had on business method patents. And so, for instance, I looked this morning with respect to those Motorola patents that Google had bought. There was 100 and some of them that had that type of claim language in the claims. Now, whether they had other claims that were different from that, who knows? But if you have a large portfolio of software patents, you're going to be in that position today of having to go back and analyze if any of them are fatally defective now based on that. And while the patent is still enforceable, while the patent's still alive, you suddenly have a skeleton in the closet if you ever litigate over that particular patent.
Yeah, and on that issue, I went back, just picked out one of these recent Apple patents that's rather popular to talk about. It's this linking within phones where you have addresses come up, provides a link, things like that within a contact list. And I went in there and I pulled out, and I blogged on it. I pulled out a claim that's really close to what was held to be invalid in the CyberSource case. And I think that's going to be a real issue. Now, in that patent, there were other hardware-related claims that would still survive. But you're right, there are situations where people have, I think, assumed that was the correct way to claim software by putting in some arbitrary kind of meaningless, hardware language.
Yeah.
And I think it's never been a good idea, but it has been practiced quite a bit. So those will be, true. They're skeletons in the closet, no doubt.
So Matt, before we went live today, you're traveling in the Bay Area. We see you there in the studio in Petaluma. I was asking you if you had your cell phone shut off riding BART in San Francisco, and you told me no, you didn't. But several people did last Thursday evening, I believe it was. And so I'd like to get your guys' take on this. What happened basically is the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit Authority in San Francisco, got wind of a demonstration that was going to take place, which they thought was calculated to disrupt BART's service. And the BART representatives have been saying this would be akin to having a demonstration attempting to disrupt service on an airplane while in flight. So through that lens, they took some rather drastic steps, including throwing a switch that made it impossible to use cell service underground at least one BART station, maybe more, in San Francisco, which had a huge, it only lasted a few hours, but it was designed to deter this demonstration. And so folks thinking about this had a number of complaints about it. First of all, that the FCC doesn't like it when you monkey around with people's cellular access. And secondly, that, gee, this sounds a lot like something that you might see in Syria or Egypt or other countries attempting to squelch their lawfully protesting citizens. So I'll toss this to Evan first. Evan, are you uncomfortable with a transit authority flipping off cell service?
It's definitely the kind of question that, if you think about it long enough, should make you uncomfortable. But I'm also uncomfortable in quickly joining either side of the dispute, which is really pretty intense. It's very easy to just go ahead and surrender to the righteous indignation that, oh my God, this is a blatant First Amendment violation. I can't talk. I can't communicate with others while I am in this, in this train station or within the facility of the transportation unit there. And so it's very easy to get all worked up about that. At the same time, the ease with which you can work up that righteous indignation doesn't obscure or should not do away with the important security interests that are at stake here. And there are situations where the government can do certain things to restrict speech because of some other countervailing interest, where there is a compelling interest for for example, the safety. It's the textbook example. All lawyers learn this in constitutional law, and it's in popular culture too. You can't scream fire in a movie theater. I don't know if you could hear the siren that just went off right when I said the word fire, which is kind of weird. There are certain things that you cannot say, and the government can impose those restrictions. And if there was it's easy to think of a lot of different analogous situations, and whether or not Bart's analogy that it's like shutting down a protest that was happening on an airplane, that analogy breaks down after a certain point, because you're not really on the train. I mean, people's cell phone service is restricted when they're on the platform too, which is not really on the train, and so that all breaks down. So I guess I don't know how to fully analyze this. All I know is that we do ourselves a disservice when we just say, one, this is bad and shouldn't be done because it's a First Amendment violation, and it's bad because the FCC doesn't like it. What we really need to do is get behind that question. Well, why might the FCC not like this, rather than just say, well, the FCC wouldn't like it, so don't do that. And then the other thing is we've really got to take into consideration the important security issues that are there, and really evaluate in a meaningful way if shutting down communications is the only way to address those security interests, if there are not other avenues and tools available to law enforcement to prevent mob violence. If there are other ways to prevent that other than shutting down the communications, that's where the emphasis should be, and we should move away toward this shutting down the communications altogether because of the overbreadth of that. There are plenty of communications that can be made when it's shut down other than just say, hey, let's go commit violence on the train platform tonight.
Well, I hope this isn't social commentary that, back in the day when you had protests, they had to break out the tear gas and rubber bullets and riot teams, versus today that you just have to shut off their internet connection and they'll go home. So,
right. Our barriers to entry have risen, I guess, for protest. There was a really poignant statement made by BART Deputy Chief Benson H. Farrow, who's the person who acknowledges making, he had to have this vetted, et cetera, but he's the person who ultimately made the decision and threw the switch. And he said, ultimately I had to decide whether, and I'm paraphrasing, this was a kind of situation where I would feel safe for my wife and daughter to be down there on the platform if this were going on, and I decided no. So we did what we did. And, it's hard to argue with that kind of reasoning, unless you're Kevin Bankston at the EFF, who really, really took umbrage that this had happened and had all kinds of good arguments about, where this goes and why it's a slippery slope. Matt, any thoughts?
Well, I think that's an incredibly low threshold. Whether or not you feel I think you have to look at more than that when you're making a decision of that magnitude. I think in the end it was probably just a premature decision, a little hair trigger maybe, and in some ways maybe it's good because I think it's brought it to the forefront, and maybe they'll be more careful and thoughtful when they, issues like that come up, not just there but anywhere else, and see the ramifications of it.
Right, or maybe all they've done is teach the would-be protesters not. We were laughing before the show. There's no AT&T service in San Francisco anyway, so if you were relying on that cellular network, even underground, I don't care what switch is on or off, you're probably not going to have any conversations around organizing your event. But if you're using some other service, now maybe what you'll bring is walkie-talkies.
There you go. Or,
some other means of communication that I'd say it's rather comical to think that someone staging a serious protest is relying that heavily on the cellular network, which is sort of notoriously unreliable.
There's ham radio back here.
Exactly.
It's all set up for them.
Yep. Something more bulletproof. What do you think, Evan?
Yeah, I would be more inclined to use a CB radio. That would be my preference. Or just carry around flashcards.
Yeah. Hey, we were using walkie-talkies in Wyoming, and they worked great over about a 10-mile radius. So, I guess there's your fallback.
Lots of protests in Wyoming. I know that they really were cracking down on it.
Someone was trying to shut down the horse trails, and it was being a real problem. Over there in the world of tobacco packaging, Anna Christian brought this to my attention, and it's another interesting point on the First Amendment front, because we've talked recently on the show about entities, corporations, and their First Amendment rights, and how much the First Amendment actually protects commercial speech. And here the answer is not much, because there is law that's going to go into effect that requires cigarette manufacturers to take up about half of their packaging in displaying really graphic images what happens to you from smoking, whether it's someone breathing smoke through their tracheotomy or pictures of a damaged lung, or, basically things that no right-thinking cigarette manufacturer would put on their packaging unless they were forced to do it. But they are going to be forced to do it, and now there's a First Amendment challenge to that. What do you think of that one, Steve?
Well, it's interesting to see how quickly, the FDA, when they had the ability to start regulating tobacco, stepped in to do things like this. Versus how long it took them to regulate pharmaceuticals in the same way. They clearly have an agenda, particularly towards tobacco, and you can see that in the content of the disclaimers that they're requiring to go on there. And it'll be interesting to see. The government earns, both the state and federal government earns a lot of money off revenue from cigarette sales. So if they are as successful as they hope they are in discouraging people from smoking, it'll be interesting to see what that happens with state budgets and federal budgets.
Wow.
Right. Maybe someone did the math and figured out that the healthcare expenses trumped the tax revenue or something.
Has there ever been any evidence with regard to other markings on, we've had obviously forever, the cautions and the warnings, not like this, but is there any evidence that actually does anything to kind of curb smokers?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I never smoked because I saw them.
Yeah.
That's it. No,
that's the only reason.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess maybe at that first, you're buying your first ever pack of cigarettes. You're 15 years old and not supposed to be buying them anyway. I guess if you see the rotting lung on the top quadrant of the pack,
that just made it cooler.
Might have some impact.
If you're 15. Now it's really cool.
Yeah, it depends. I guess it depends on your how many piercings you've engaged in before you go and get this particular pack of cigarettes. But I do think it's interesting from a commercial speech standpoint, and there's some heavy-duty law firms lined up on the tobacco side, unsurprisingly. They've got Latham & Watkins, O'Melveny & Myers, Covington & Burling, and they're challenging this on free speech and commercial speech grounds, which I think it'll be interesting to follow through, because this is a pretty extreme thing that the cigarette companies are being asked to do by the government here. So they probably have something to talk about in court, but at the same time, the FDA has a strong interest in making sure that people don't smoke. So we shall see. Lots more to talk about on the show, but I want to thank our second sponsor for episode 125 of This Week in Law, and that is Netflix. This episode is brought to you by Netflix, which streams thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means you save time, money, and hassle. That instant access on Netflix comes in handy in so many places. Of course, if you are on a more than reasonably reliable wireless network, it's deliverable that way. And there is Wi-Fi in so many places these days, including on airplanes. So if you want to partake of a movie while you're flying cross country and you plunk down, I think I was on a Delta flight recently, it was less than $5 to have Wi-Fi access on that flight. So the price point is getting very nice to be able to access your Netflix just about anywhere. And with that instant access, you can watch wherever you may be on your Mac or PC or iPad, and your iPhone, if that's what you've got with you. If you have a gaming console at your home, an Xbox 360, a PS3, a Nintendo Wii, you can watch your Netflix right there on your TV. Of course, you can do that with an Apple TV or a Roku box too. And the library is just immense. You can begin watching a movie or show on one device and then finish on a different one, which is super nice and convenient. Whatever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want at any time, and you can cancel at any time. So if you're not already a Netflix user, and I know probably most of the folks listening are because it's such a great service, you can get it for 30 days for free, or anybody you know can. If they go to netflix.com/twit, be sure to use that URL when you sign up. That helps Netflix know that we sent you their way, and helps us out. And we love helping Netflix out because we love their support of Twit and This Week in Law, and we hope you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix. All right. So, Evan, I don't think it would be a complete show if we didn't bring up the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act at some point. There's a new case about that you have blogged about. Destroying data to cover your tracks is about illegal action is likely without authorization under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Do you want to bring us up to speed there? Yeah,
as you're implying there, it's true. I really love the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's so interesting.
And who doesn't? To see. Yes.
Right. We've all got our vices, I guess. This particular case here was here in Illinois, and there was a little bit of an irony involved too, because what happened was a guy was really high up in a professional services consulting firm. I'm not going to broadcast the name here. Go to my blog and you can see the case name and know who it was. But he was really high up, and he was in the privacy and security division of the company. So there's the source of the irony. He left and went to work for a startup competitor, and after he did, he sent his work-issued laptop back, but he had taken out the old hard drive and replaced it with a blank one, and he said he had copied all of the information off of the old hard drive onto the workplace server. So he said he didn't really permanently delete any information or totally destroy any information. He just gave back a copy of this. And so the fine point issue on this under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and determining whether or not he had violated that act, was whether or not he had acted without authorization when it came to that data. And this is always an interesting question, because when he actually destroyed that hard drive, or took the hard drive out and replaced it with another, that was before he had resigned, and so he was still an employee. So, didn't he have authorization as one of the highest folks in the company to do with that as he pleased? And here in the Seventh Circuit, which is includes Illinois and a couple of other states around, the courts have said the moment, even if you're still employed by your employer, the moment that you do something in violation of your duty of loyalty, for example, destroy data or copy it knowing that you're going to go to a competitor, you are thereby acting without authorization, and that is a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Other parts of the country, other circuits, or at least the Ninth Circuit out on the West Coast where you all are, say that that's different. There's a case called Brecka where it's not, where that is not the same analysis. This breach of duty of loyalty thereby makes it without authorization. So if the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was ever to make it to the Supreme Court, I think it would be on this issue here. So we have another case that I had written about, the one that we're talking about here at the district court level, which stands for the proposition that you are acting without authorization when it comes to your computer, your work-issued computer, if you're doing something that is when you're not being loyal to your employer, even if you have the right to do whatever you want, essentially with the data that's on that computer. One final little point here, just to kind of add some context in this. There's so much litigation in the employment context these days involving the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and to a certain extent it's putting a square peg in a round hole, but everybody seems to, or most people seem to think that peg fits just fine. This is the federal anti-hacking statute, and so it's interesting to see it being used in situations where employees are leaving companies, and what they do with their digital information that they acquired and kept and had control over while they were there. It's interesting to see the anti-hacking statute be used in that context, and there are some interesting developments that come out of it. So that's the case I wrote about, and always good reading. And if anybody else is looking for a way to fall asleep, just do some reading.
No, I think that you raised two important points. One is that without authorization language, the fact that the courts are interpreting it differently, and it's already broad and amorphous language to begin with, and it's not clear whether there needs to be some specific policy that's violated or not, and the fact that the act is being used here in a way I don't think the legislators would have envisioned when they first put it into play. So I think it is worth paying attention to, and thanks for bringing us up to speed there. We'll look to see if maybe this does get in front of the Supreme Court on that circuit split issue. And Evan, I'm a little bit surprised that aren't you supposed to be wearing like a New Orleans Saint jersey about now? Something has happened that I believe we discussed on the show a while back with Ernie Svensson, and that is that theft charges were finally brought in the iPhone 4 theft case. Not against Gizmodo and Gawker, but against the Apple employee who left the phone in the bar. You want to pick up on that one for us?
Yeah, fine. I lost a bet all the way back at the beginning of 2010. So this has been, a year and a half or so ago when this actually went down. I know it was like the first quarter of 2010 when the iPhone 4 prototype was floating around out there, and the guy left it at the bar, and this other guy picked it up and sent it off to Gizmodo. Remember that? Way back, when all this happened. Ernie Svensson, Ernie the attorney, was a regular on the show at that point, and the discussion was, are the police going to press charges against this guy, this 22-year-old guy named Hogan, who found the phone at the bar and turned it over to Gizmodo with the help of a friend and all that stuff. And I said, look, the cops and the prosecutor's office have got better things to do. Nobody is going to get arrested for this. But I was wrong. And what I said is that if anybody was arrested at any point, any time in the future, I would wear a New Orleans Saints jersey on the show. But that was when Ernie was on the show, and then the context of that was right after the Colts. I'm an Indianapolis Colts fan. I'm originally from Indiana. And then the Colts and the Saints had played in the Super Bowl, and so that was the source of that. So I just really don't think it's culturally relevant anymore in any stretch of the imagination. So go ahead and tell Ernie. But if you want to keep it quiet, that's fine. That's fine too.
Statute of limitations is 2 years.
I think it's culturally relevant as long as the iPhone 5 is not yet out. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're on the hook too.
Somebody send me a jersey. Anybody in the chat room, if you're a New Orleans fan, because I didn't say that I would buy it. I just said I would wear it.
There we go.
It was great reasoning, but I still think you're on the hook.
That's fine.
No one likes a Welsher.
Yeah.
All right. Well, no one really likes a lawsuit in the conventional way when they're involved in it. And our tip of the week is courtesy of the video game arena. And it's particularly a company called, or a company or a person, I haven't quite worked that out in my own mind yet, called Notch, that is the creator of Minecraft. And they are coming out with a game called Scrolls. And there's another outfit out there called Bethesda that has a well-known game called The Elder Scrolls. And Bethesda did some trademark rattling of sabers about the Scrolls game. And Notch came back with just a fabulous notion, and that is that instead of litigating this trademark issue over the name Scrolls versus The Elder Scrolls, let's just play Quake 3 instead. There's a great blog post proposing this on Notch's blog site, and it's written up at Geekosystem. So my tip to you this week is if you're facing litigation, why not just go play Quake 3 and work it out that way? And he's quite serious. He has exactly all the parameters worked out, what maps they should use, and 3 of the best players from each side, and may the best team win. And if the Scrolls side wins, then they get to use the name, and if the other side wins, then they don't. So it seems to me a great way to resolve litigation in an unconventional mode of alternative dispute resolution. So hats off to Notch for that one. And our resource of the week is something that I had not stumbled across before, but since we've been talking about today, and we so often talk about, whether our elected representatives understand the internet well enough and understand the impact of their actions when they enact something like, say, Protect IP, for example. There is a Congressional Internet Caucus out there, and there is a private nonprofit entity called the Advisory Committee to the Congressional Internet Caucus. And what the Advisory Committee's function is to put together programs where there's exchange and interaction with congresspeople about internet and policy issues. And they do a wonderful series of events. There was just one in Palo Alto with Congressman Bob Goodlatte, Technology Town Hall Roundtable with him, where anybody could come. That was earlier this week, and they're doing a series of these through September. So it's great to keep an eye on this. And then they also do a State of the Net conference annually, and the next one's coming up in January. So our advisory committee to the Congressional Internet Caucus is our resource of the week. It's a great way to interact with Congress on how the net works. And with that, I want to go around and see if we have any last thoughts from our panelists on anything we've discussed today or anything else that's on their mind. Matt, you in studio, why don't you tell us if you have any final words for our audience here at TWiL.
No, I don't. The studio is awesome. It's a great it's a great setup, and the weather's great. And thanks for having me on. And I'm going to keep blogging at Litigating Apple about some of these upcoming issues on as they develop for these Apple and Google cases and interesting tech patent cases that are sprouting up and just keep getting bigger and expanding to more and more areas within the field. So it's interesting. So
wonderful. And all of us non-members of the patent bar appreciate the work you do there and the good, straightforward information that you're providing. So thanks so much for joining us today as well.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Steve, great to connect with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on.
Any final nuggets of wisdom for us?
Well, I think I'd go back to the case Evans was talking about a few minutes ago and just remind the viewers to keep your work email, your work documents separate from your home documents, and you don't end up in that position where you feel like you have to destroy a computer to keep your employer from finding out what you were doing. Keep them separate. Good grief.
Absolutely. Good grief. All right, to end, folks can follow you on Twitter, of course. You are Nipper over there.
I am.
And any other, aside from your firm with Matt, who joined us last week, any other activities you want to bring us up to speed on?
Yeah, other than the firm, which is bnip.com, that's where our website's at. And I infrequently blog still over at inventblog.com. It's something that since starting the new firm and being busy this summer, I've kind of fallen out of the habit of doing, and we'll get back there just yet, so.
Great. And of course, folks, I didn't mention Matt Macarti's Twitter handle, but he is frequently in our chat room and a big part of the Twit and TWiL audience. He is iMacAZ when you find him in the chat room or on Twitter. So go look him up there. And Evan, wonderful to be back in the seat here with you and seeing you again this week.
Yes, the same. And I just wanted to pass on a little thing here. Two of the greatest things in the world are colloquialisms and things that are meta. So I just read this morning that the Concise Oxford English Dictionary, which is a derivative of the the Oxford Dictionary, has added the word woot, W-O-O-T. So I would just finish off by saying woot. The word woot has been added to the to that dictionary. So thought you would.
Yeah, there were a bunch of tech-related words I was reading yesterday. Retweet is in there. That feels like such common usage. I can't believe it's not already in dictionaries.
Right. Right.
Woot to you too.
Right on.
And have a fabulous weekend. And folks, when you're not listening to This Week in Law, you can find Evan over at internetcases.com, and he's Internet Cases on Twitter. And we also post things about the show before the show. I post them on Google Plus a lot lately. Love to get your feedback there. And also the show has its own Facebook page at facebook.com/thisweekinlaw. We post stuff there too. We post the video from the show after the fact. And we love to have discussions with you and hear what's on your mind, because that's how we decide what to talk about on the show. So we really appreciate all your input there. And also, of course, you can email me anytime. I'm denise@twit.tv. You can hit me up on Google Plus or on Twitter, where I'm D Howell. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care.